I actually think winter can be a really good time to make the most of your eMTB. The winters in UK could be a pretty grim place to be, but getting out on your e-bike for a blast, sliding around in the mud, feeling fast but moving slow is a lot of fun. And here are some of the tips I've learned to make the most out of your e-bike this winter. It's done nothing but rain in the UK for 2 weeks now, and the first day the sunshine comes out, it is freezing cold. So we've got mud and we've got ice and all sorts of horrible conditions to deal with. But I do actually try and think about the trails I'm riding in the UK. I know some parts of the world, when it's wet and muddy, riding is really discouraged, but it's not like that in the UK. I do just try and pick somewhere that is a bit firmer though, so I'm not riding through the trails and wrecking them. Also, that way, you're not riding in the worst of the mud and getting wet from the ground up. But if you do ride in all conditions, it's definitely worth spending some time on some trail maintenance to win yourself some brownie points for the local trail crew, but also make sure that the trails are good and rideable all year round. So, what kit do I use to battle the mud? A mud guard and some glasses to keep the muck out of my eyes, some riding trousers so I keep my legs nice and warm, some merino socks and a merino base layer. Sometimes I wear an insulated gilet underneath my Gore-Tex waterproof jacket, Gore-Tex waterproof winter riding shoes and some riding gloves. You're not going to need all those things all the time, but I do think, particularly when it comes to clothes, layers are really important. And I've always loved merino wool because it just lets you sort of sweat and it wicks it away. So you don't get too hot, but I also like a gilet as well. So on days like today when it is really cold, something to keep your body warm is really nice. Hand guards, I think they're not essential, but probably a really good idea if you ride somewhere slippery, because I think it also keeps the sort of cold air from your hands. But when you fall off, it helps to protect your levers from getting bent or broken. So not a bad idea as well. I rarely go for longer, more epic rides in winter time because I've spent plenty of time stranded on a hillside miles away from home or the van in the wind and the rain, so I don't risk it quite as much. I'd much rather stay in a smaller area where I've got a bit of an escape plan should things go wrong, like a snapper chain or bike problems or whatever. But also you've got to bear in mind that the cold actually affects your battery range as well. So it's really hard to know how much less range you get because the conditions change as well. Like today, there's some soft ground around, but I'll be much more conservative with how far or how much elevation gained I'm planning on riding in the cold winter months. I know it's worth being prepared all year round because anything can happen whilst around the trails, but obviously if it's colder like it is today, it's like below freezing, you don't want to be hanging around on the hillside for very long. So be prepared to fix the most common problems like punctures. And the other thing, definitely winter time, I'll take a multi-tool that has a chain tool on there, because when your chain gets really mucky and gritty, it's so much more likely to snap if you get a bit of a misshift, if you're putting too much power through, and the chain's clicking up into a gear. It's easier to snap the chain when it's covered in grit. Although today, so far, it's pretty clean, to be fair, but just make sure your multi-tool has got a chain tool on it. If you're going to ride along the road at all, I think it's definitely a backup plan as well to have at least a rear light, because even in the sunshine like today, there'll be dark shadows, and if it's getting at all dark, dusky, you need a rear light on the road to stay safe for sure. Right, we know that extreme temperatures are no good for e-bike batteries, so I'm lucky that my garage is attached to the house. So it does get cold in winter, but it's never completely Arctic. Although apparently it is best to store your batteries at sort of room temperature, so that's anywhere between 10 and 25 degrees Celsius. And it probably does get a little bit cold in that in my garage, particularly today, it's a very cold day. Probably more like 6 or 7 degrees, I think. So obviously if you can, it's a good idea to take your battery into the house to store it and to charge it. Much easier if you've got a removable battery, of course. Otherwise, you might have to try and think about a way of keeping your bike slightly warm in winter. riding with less grip is definitely more difficult, but I think if you persevere, it's really good for your skills to learn exactly where the balance is on your bike, and actually learning to drift the bike as well is great. But I do like to stick my sort of riding levels within the realms of possibility. For example, there's one climb in my local woods that is really difficult in summertime. It's touch and go if you get up that in the dry. So in wintertime, I don't even bother, because it's gonna, you know, bash my confidence, and it's also almost certainly going to lead to just me having to push up it and get super sweaty. So I'd much rather stick where I know I can feel good and ride. Like today, actually, it's really shockingly like not muddy. I wouldn't say it was dry, but there's hardly any standing ground. I guess we didn't have any rain yesterday either, but it's been so wet here. But actually the lack of grip on these trails is still down to the sort of all the leaves covering the trails. But actually you see this part of the trail is really good fun. And on the edges of the track, there are berms, and quite steep ones as well, where the leaves aren't sat on them. So I'm gonna try and make the most of using these berms and not try and do any experimental inside lines. I'll leave that for summertime, because I know on these leaves, there's no chance of doing that. So I'll try and be a bit more calm with my riding style and stick to where I know there's gonna be some grip. Right, now to what I think is the most exciting part of winter, and that is mud tyre time. I actually have some of the fondest memories of riding my bike in horrible conditions when I used to race downhill. If you've got your bike set up for the conditions, it is amazing. If you kind of forget about all the clearing up and the cold and the wet, granted, that is a bit tough, but if you've never tried riding an e-bike with proper mud tyres, then you haven't lived. So today is that day. It's time to change my tyres. Look at how aggressive that is. So this is a Schwalbe Shredder gravity tyre. They're about 10 mil deep, those treads. If you live somewhere like I do and it gets wet and muddy in winter, I can't recommend it enough. It makes your riding so much more fun when you can dig in and you'll grip on stuff you wouldn't have believed you could grip on before. Yes, it's probably going to have some effect on your range, but honestly, the enjoyment levels go through the roof, so I wouldn't worry so much about your range. You will need to keep on top of your maintenance that much better in winter. Cleaning your bike is a bit of a chore, okay? But if you've got the right kit, it doesn't need to be. Water ingress into motors is the #1 way they get killed, so go steady. A brush is your best friend here, and save the spraying for the rest of the bike. But be careful with wires and connectors and charging ports. And make sure it's not going to go anywhere near your cranks, because that's how the water gets into the motor. Also, don't do it upside down, because you can get water into places it doesn't need to be. Aside from riding and cleaning your bike, I also think winter is a great time for tinkering with your bike, but also doing a bit of service work just to make sure that it lasts the winter. So things like headsets and linkage bearings, if you don't have enough grease in them, so clean them out and stick some of this stuff in the bearings, but also kind of on the seals as well. That is going to really help prevent water get in there, because as soon as water gets in the bearing, if it sits there after a ride, that's when you get corrosion and pitting, and it just ruins the bearing straight away. So that's super important. Obviously, lubing your chain every ride in winter is the way to do it, especially if it's really wet. Obviously, sometimes even in the UK it's kind of cold and dry, but if it's wet, it's going to be, you know, washing your chain out. Again, getting the right lube. I'm sort of lazy about it. I use this premium all-weather stuff. Actually, on these PT things, they have a really good guide. It tells you wet, damp and dry, and this does all of those really well. However, if you want the best stuff for the wettest winter conditions, as you see, this is the wet lube, and on that scale it goes right to the end. So it's got different stuff in it. Did you know wet and dry lube is completely different stuff? So there's just blends of waxes and oils, and it depends on the time of the year, and obviously the stuff will just stay on your chain much better than dry in the winter. Also, I try and stick, you know, something like this silicone spray. Again, this stuff is really good for helping mud not stick to your bike. only thing you've got to be super careful with this is if you get this on your brakes, on your rotors or on your pads, it'll ruin them. It'll make them howl like mad and not work. I've had pretty good success in the past of getting a blowtorch out to boil it out, but you don't want to do that in the first place. So the best thing to do with this stuff or any silicone spray is actually spray it onto something first, so onto your nice rag, and then rub it onto the bike rather than going mad and spraying it all over the bike directly. So make sure you get yourself out in winter. It's not that bad. It's just somewhat challenging with all the cleaning, the mud, the cold, the miserable weather. Why don't you treat yourself to some electric heated gloves for Christmas? Pretty good. Anyway, make the most of your bike this winter.